Hi, welcome to the second part of the video and at the same time the first chapter of my book Twin Flame Gnosis. After learning in the first part about how the idea of a shared soul originated in antiquity, and how the concept appears, among other things, in the teachings of Hermeticism, Gnosis, and Sufism, what the Theosophical Society and Carl Gustav Jung had to do with it, we now take a look at modern times. In this video, you will learn how secret and occult societies, the New Age movement, Twin Flame Universe, New World All-Star, and the Internet age influenced the modern concept of twin flames. We also talk about the woman nobody wants to talk about, the woman who shaped the modern term. But now, enjoy watching.
Occult circles and secret societies were decisive for the preservation, transformation, and transmission of esoteric knowledge, including ideas that deal with duality, soul journey, and spiritual union. Societies like the Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn transmitted deep esoteric knowledge about soul, polarity, and spiritual union over centuries. They understood human development as an initiatory path, an initiation that leads to inner alchemy and to the union of polar principles, often symbolized by the marriage of king and queen. Many of these teachings laid the foundation for later concepts like the sacred union or the divine couple. In this tradition, today's twin flame ideas can be interpreted as a modern continuation of an ancient esoteric symbolic language. Especially the emphasis on mirroring, transformation, and cosmic unity runs as a common thread through all currents. One must not forget, of course, that the teachings of these societies build upon already existing spiritual teachings like Hermeticism, Gnosis, Kabbalah, Buddhism, and others. For example, the Rosicrucians, founded in the 17th century, were a mysterious, mystical Christian movement with Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and alchemical influences. They taught the union of masculine and feminine, light and dark, matter and spirit, the alchemical Hieros Gamos, or mystical marriage. They believed in inner divinity, reincarnation, and soul transformation. The Rosicrucians understood the human soul as a divine spark that has descended into matter to return to its original perfection through experience and purification. The path of the adept was considered a symbolic soul alchemy, in which the lower self is transformed into the higher spiritual being, a process that corresponds to the union of opposites within. The motif of rebirth played a central role here, not only as physical reincarnation, but as a continuous inner transformation process in which the soul returns step by step to the divine source. In this sense, the teaching of the Rosicrucians can be seen as an early Western equivalent of that soul journey that also has central significance in modern twin flame understanding, the return to the state of unity and inner light. At the same time, the Rosicrucians show clear parallels to Gnosis. Like the ancient Gnostics, they emphasized salvation through knowledge and the return of the divine spark in man, but transferred this idea into a Christian alchemical symbolism that understands matter as a medium of spiritual refinement. Freemasonry is a traditional initiatory movement that has its origin in the Middle Ages in the lodges of stonemasons and has developed over the centuries into a philosophical symbolic system. Central is the work on oneself. Through self-knowledge, symbolic rituals, and gradual initiation through successive degrees, the individual is to be led to higher consciousness and inner perfection. Each person is thereby pictorially seen as a living stone of the temple, which through spiritual work and ethical development is returned to its original divine form. In the higher degrees, especially in the Scottish Rite, allegorical representations of the union of polar forces, masculine and feminine, light and dark, play a central role. Here initiates are confronted with the mechanisms of the ego, the illusion of the material world, and the mysteries of death and rebirth. Rituals, such as the symbolic grave or burial ritual, illustrate the necessity of letting go of the old self in order to attain higher knowledge. The highest degrees, including the 33rd degree, reveal deeper insights into universal consciousness, the structure of the world, and one's own soul order. Symbols such as the all-seeing eye stand for this perception of a reality beyond physical appearance. This well-known symbol of the eye conceals one of the greatest secrets of being, and more on this can be found in the 6th chapter. The connection to concepts like twin flames also becomes understandable here. Freemasonry emphasizes that inner unity is achieved only through the harmonization of opposites, and that true knowledge is possible only in the interplay of masculine and feminine, active and passive energy. The work on oneself, the stages of initiation and identification with one's own soul, thus lead to a similar soul journey as described in Gnostic, Rosicrucian or Hermetic traditions, a journey out of the illusion of the material world toward true self-knowledge and return to divine harmony. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, founded at the end of the 19th century, is considered one of the most influential occult lodges of modern times. It combined various esoteric traditions such as Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, alchemy, and Egyptian magic into a comprehensive system of spiritual initiation. The goal was to lead the initiate on his path to the highest perfection, symbolized by the marriage of king and queen, an image of the magical androgyne representing the perfect union of masculine and feminine principles. The members, including Aleister Crowley, intensively engaged with polarity, soul mirroring, and spiritual resonance. Their writings, often published in the form of books or manuscripts of the lodge, formed a foundation for the later sacred union theme in esotericism and influenced concepts that can be found today in twin flame teachings. The rituals of the Golden Dawn pursued a clear spiritual agenda. They were meant not only to guide initiates in symbolic actions, but to effect an actual inner transformation in which ego and illusions are overcome and the soul is aligned with its divine unity. For our topic, the notion that here too, two complementary forces, often described as masculine and feminine, must be brought into harmony not only externally but in the soul itself, is particularly relevant. The work of the lodge, with systematic rituals, meditations, and symbol work, can thus be seen as a precursor to modern concepts of twin flame union. It describes the journey to self-knowledge, identification with one's own consciousness, and the search for perfect inner unity that leads beyond the purely material world. Only in the later 20th century does the term twin flame really appear, coined by the American mystic Elizabeth Clare Prophet. For her, twin flames are two aspects of the same divine essence, separated by karma, united by divine plan, the basis for the concept known to us today. Prophet was an extremely controversial personality, which is probably also the reason why her name is rarely mentioned nowadays, and the community usually refers to a mysterious source in the 60s, even though she was the first with the organization Church Universal and Triumphant to systematically develop and spread this teaching, and generally helped shape the New Age era. According to her theory, the two soul halves emerged from a so-called white fire body of spirit, before the spiritual soul energy split into two flames, masculine and feminine. Twin flames share an identical electronic blueprint, an energetic signature relevant to their divine mission. The original duality of twin flames is based on divine unity, and both carry identical spiritual potential. The reunion, according to Prophet's theory, is not a romantic coincidence but a spiritual mission. The separation occurs through karma and life experiences, and reunion comes only when both flames have grown sufficiently. The twin flames are thereby never separated on the causal level. Even without consciousness, they are permanently connected on the soul level. They can incarnate simultaneously, but not recognize each other due to karmic veils, even if they meet. Prophet points out that incarnations can also be temporally staggered or take place on other levels or in other dimensions, and simultaneous incarnation in multiple bodies serves spiritual development and mission. She was also the first to distinguish between soul companions and soulmates. Soulmates were accordingly karmic, missional connections over several lives, not spiritually divided individual souls. Soulmates help us heal. Twin flames bring transformation. Twin flames, on the other hand, according to Prophet, have a higher divine task together, namely collective consciousness elevation, service to humanity, and teaching. Although spiritual conceptions of soul kinship run through history, it was probably Elizabeth Clare Prophet who first formulated a complete teaching about twin flames in the 1960s. Individual channelers or esotericists may have had similar ideas, but without systematic documentation or greater impact. Prophet's combination of karmic development, energetic soul signature, and simultaneous incarnation formed the foundation for many of today's interpretations. Even though other esotericists of this time hinted at comparable concepts, it was Prophet who bundled them and thus made them accessible to a broad spiritual audience. However, the spiritual teachings of Prophet and her husband were partly controversial and apocalyptically tinged, which led to preparation of their followers for catastrophes, for example, bunker construction and armed camps in Montana. Critics called their church sectarian, authoritarian, and manipulative, creating emotional dependencies, even with tragic consequences. That's why people in the twin flame community don't talk about the woman who so strongly influenced the idea and modern concept. It should be noted, however, that despite the criticism and controversies, one may very well distinguish between content and source here too. From the 1980s onwards, the New Age movement developed into a global network of spiritual currents in which ancient wisdom traditions, Eastern philosophy, mysticism, and modern psychology merged with each other. In this context, the concept of twin flames as a spiritual idea gained increasing attention. Unlike in classical esoteric systems, it was no longer just about metaphysical symbolism, but above all about the practical, psychological, and spiritual development of individuals. Authors such as Patricia Judry and Maury Pressman contributed significantly to popularization, particularly with works like Twin Souls from 1995. They emphasized that the encounter with the other half should not only be understood romantically, but above all as a mirroring experience that promotes personal healing, self-reflection, and consciousness expansion. Each twin flame encounter accordingly represents a challenge. It forces the partners to recognize their own shadow sides, transform the ego, and unfold their spiritual potentials. In the New Age perspective, the soul connection is understood as universal resonance. Two soul halves that were originally one find each other again across space, time, and incarnations. This concept builds on the basic ideas of Gnosis, Rosicrucian philosophy, and Hermetic traditions, but reinterprets them by placing the individual development process in the foreground. Thus, spiritual, psychological, and energetic levels merge. The search for the twin flame becomes the catalyst of inner transformation, the journey of the soul back to its perfection and to the unity of consciousness and heart. From the early 2000s onwards, the concept of twin flames began to achieve a new dimension of popularity, supported by the Internet. Spiritual communities, YouTube channels, blogs, forums, and social media platforms made the idea accessible to a worldwide audience. At the same time, specialized coaches, channelings, and digital workshops emerged that explained the dynamics of runner and chaser, separation, emotional pain, and the intense longing for union. In this phase, the twin flame concept transformed from a theoretical esoteric idea into a practical interpretive instrument for personal relationships. People found in it answers to experiences of love, conflict, and spiritual resonance that were often felt to be too intense or fateful to be explained purely psychologically. The separation of soul halves was thereby frequently interpreted as a necessary mirroring process. The pain was meant to lead to self-reflection, healing, and inner transformation. This modern online interpretation draws on many older concepts, such as the Gnostic idea of the divided soul, the Rosicrucian notion of inner alchemy, or the Hermetic principles of polarity, but interprets them emotionally and psychologically. For users, twin flames thus become a kind of spiritual map on which personal development, karmic processes, and the search for inner wholeness become visible. In parallel, numerous practical tools emerge, such as meditation instructions, visualizations, and energetic exercises intended to promote the reunion of soul halves. In this way, the digital era has made the twin flame concept a central theme of modern spiritual self-help and relationship mysticism that has an impact far beyond traditional esoteric circles. Having arrived in modern times, we must also talk about the project Twin Flame Universe, known in the community and now far beyond, which has made the topic accessible to a broad public, but in a way that simultaneously raises new questions. Jeff and Shalia Divine teach there a structured path to union with the so-called true twin flame, accompanied by certified coaches and an intensive community structure. Many people thereby found support and orientation, while others report difficult experiences that led to intensive self-reflection. The teachings of many modern movements tend to simplify complex soul development processes and focus strongly on union with another person. In classical Gnostic and mystical tradition, however, the inward path stands at the center, a journey of knowledge that depends less on external relationships and is rather oriented towards self-realization and return to the divine origin. At this point, it should be emphasized that any critical consideration relates exclusively to the conceptual level, and not to the people or communities who work with great dedication on these topics. Different models and teachings always reflect various approaches, and none of them rightfully claims absolute truth. Twin Flame Gnosis, therefore, does not understand itself as an opposing position, but as another attempt to illuminate the phenomenon from an interdisciplinary perspective, historically, mystically, and psychologically. To adequately grasp such a multi-layered topic, it is necessary to view all available sources and traditions in their entirety. Only in this larger context does a more comprehensive understanding of what we call soul emerge. This book invites readers to expand their perspective, not because other paths would be wrong, but because a topic like this becomes visible only in the overall view of its many voices. Twin Flame. Gnosis is therefore not a dogmatic claim, but a research approach, a synthesis of history, mysticism, psychology, and personal experience. Every reader is invited to take what appears coherent and helpful for their own path. From about 2015 onwards, the concept of twin flames as simultaneous incarnations spread, particularly through the teachings of Kurt Johnson of New World All-Star, who combined classical soul teachings with elements of East Asian spirituality and modern approaches of quantum physics, but dispensed with a large part of the mystical elements. This view understands twin flames not as successive reincarnations, but as two simultaneously existing consciousness aspects of the same soul, an idea that, although theoretical, possesses an intuitive logic for many seekers, which I also find very plausible after my research. And more on this follows in the subsequent chapters. Johnson conveys this understanding in courses and online teaching offerings that have found attention worldwide. According to his own statements, numerous people were thereby able to have transformative experiences or develop a deeper connection to their inner self. He refers to a little-known source from the 50s and 60s, a spiritual researcher who is said to have first described the principle of soul division, very probably inspired by the teachings of Elizabeth Clare Prophet, whose influence often remains unspoken in modern discourse about soul partnerships for the reasons described. Regardless of the concrete origin, this approach shows how strongly modern twin flame teachings attempt to unite mystical knowledge, psychology, and consciousness research with each other. The impressive success stories told in this context suggest that such teachings primarily transform consciousness and self-perception. But the actual question remains: how many of these experiences truly arise from the mystery of the soul, and how many are expressions of the creative power of one's own belief? Currently, as I write this book, perhaps it only corresponds to my perception or the personal algorithm of the video platform. There is a veritable flood of twin flame videos, often with repetitive and identical, mostly AI-generated content. One could let oneself be showered with it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, virtually all-around care for all aspects of the process. For research, I watched some of them, or rather, listened, naturally also out of personal interest. Some can contain useful information, others just repeat what one already knows anyway. I advise against engaging with it excessively. One knows relatively quickly what one actually needs to know about this phenomenon, and then it depends above all on oneself what one makes of this knowledge. One could also roughly divide the modern twin flame scene into 3 different currents or teaching types. The first is the described twin flame universe, with numerous international offshoots. Former students, who now appear themselves as certified coaches, strongly romanticized and focused on their own teaching. The second is Kurt Johnson with New World All-Star, the second large community, with focus on spiritual awakening and classical East Asian spirituality, connected with modern science, completely excluding a large part of mysticism. And then there is a smaller, non-connected scene shaped by mysticism, shamanism, and occult teachings, partly also influenced by mixed forms of the other twin flame teachings, which go into the depth of the theme without dogmatically narrowing the concept. One sees that the concept of twin flames did not come out of nothing. It underwent a concrete historical development based on evolutionary esoteric lines from antiquity to modern times. But the history of twin flames is not concluded. Even if newer theories make more sense, we are only beginning to understand what this phenomenon really is, or perhaps we are only remembering again what we have forgotten.